This is the Week in Mobile, episode number 14, recorded Friday, April 29th, 2011. It's time for the Week in Mobile, episode number 14. My name is Rob Woodbridge, one of your hosts, obviously, from Untether.tv, and with me, the sole survivor from episode 13, Jeff Bacon. Jeff, how you doing?
Hey, good.
Jeff obviously can be found at, bacononthego.com, at the Suave Hog, or about.me/Jeff Bacon, or of course he's the purveyor of all things mobile at BitHeads or Ascension Cross Media. That's nice. It's the battle of the branded cups today.
Mine doesn't even say BitHeads on it though. It just has the logo, so you have to understand what it is.
Exactly.
You can't read yours. It goes too far away around. You got to do the nice single-sided logo here.
Well, yeah, I designed this myself, right?
The water tastes better out of the BitHeads cup.
I don't know about that. Well, we missed last week because we were competing among things. One was Easter and unlucky number 13. So when you compete against basically the devil and Jesus, you just let it alone and then come back the next week. Isn't that what we did? That's
true. That's exactly what we did.
Yeah. Next time we skip episode 13, we jump right to 14, and we do it around Easter. But we're back, and we somewhere along the lines have lost Anthony. I'm sure we'll find him again. Last we saw, he was sitting in a coffee shop, probably coding away on his next product for Zebu. So go, Anthony, go. We don't want to interrupt you. We're not going to rehash what happened over the last couple of weeks. We got three main themes for this show. We're going to get through it pretty quickly. We're going to talk about RIM, obviously, and some significant news that has come out of RIM over the last couple of days. Some good, some not so good, and some in the middle. We're going to talk about the impact of freemium apps that we're seeing out there in the real world, and what Apple is doing, and what this great report about freemium apps on multiple platforms is. We'll talk about that, and we're going to dive into a little bit about what the impact of this huge number that they're talking about. 44 billion apps downloaded by 2016 and what the impact of that is. That's what we're going to cover today. Nice little bouquet of news in the mobile industry. We're going to start it off with RIM. Dun dun dun. Leo Laporte always used to say that whenever he mentioned Apple back in the day before the iPod came out, whenever Apple was mentioned in a podcast, he would play taps. Right, it was the joke, right? Because the stock was at like $5 at that point, and Apple had no direction, and then all of a sudden the iPod came out, and and we know what's happened since then. So should we start playing taps for RIM right now? No, I don't believe so. RIM came out this week, and I think it was yesterday, and said, "Listen, we are not going to hit the numbers that we said a month ago. They've adjusted their guidance, and they've adjusted their guidance down, and they've been hammered today in the stock market. I think they've lost 10 or 14% of their value.
13.7% on the TSE today, $7.50 or so.
So what's going on over there? You made great observation before we went live with this, was that they haven't released a product. They put all their effort. We talked about this, I think, in episode number 7 or 8, where they've been putting all their effort into the playbook, and oops, hey, they have all these things called smartphones that they haven't released. When was the last release of their product? Of a product other than the playbook?
Maybe the Torch. Maybe the Torch was the last major device release that they had.
So
they might have had a couple of minor ones in between, but the Torch was definitely the last major product launch.
But so they haven't released the product, and now obviously they're being criticized. Now they were criticized because of the playbook and how long it took to get out, and the fact that they didn't have an answer to the iPad. So they come out with a playbook, they rush that thing to the market, and it's out there, and then not a moment after, they're now criticized because they've been lagging behind in other product development. Can these guys win? Does Lazaridis have the right? I mean, does he have it right when he complains? Like, why can't I get a break?
Well, it's interesting because once your company is perceived a certain way and your devices are perceived a certain way by the mass media, it kind of gets picked up on. And if you're perceived in a positive light, everybody looks for the positives, and if you're perceived in a negative light, everybody looks for the negatives. So enough people kind of got saying that RIM is going to have problems in the future. And because people start believing that, everybody looked for where the problems would be. So every time there's a problem, they say, see, look, there's a problem. I told you there'd be a problem. And so they kind of justify the past predictions. It's almost like, the future becomes the present that you're predicting. And Apple's had a good run, legitimately so, great products, amazing success, and so the publicity that comes out from Apple is all good, and everybody looks for the positives in what they're doing. And in RIMs, it's been the opposite. Everybody has thought they were going to have trouble competing in the consumer market, trouble competing with Apple, and so they look for signs that's coming true. And so a lot of the press coming out has been negative. And I was reading an article this week. I wish I could remember who it was, but they were making an analogy with Google and Honeycomb, and saying, is Honeycomb dead? Is that just like an operating system that is going to be end of life and there's no possible way to recover from it because the first device that it shipped on, the Zoom, was kind of roundly panned as not a successful device. Even though Motorola says now they've shipped 250,000 Zooms in the first quarter, which is not great, but it's not zero. And the device definitely has its problems, but the bad feelings from the Zoom are basically carrying over into Honeycomb. And while Honeycomb definitely has the problems, it's whether or not the OS can survive that first bad product launch for it. And I think RIM is going to face the same positives and negatives in that the first device they're launching with QNX on a new platform is good. Like, the hardware is solid and the operating system is good. There's a lot of things with it that could be improved, and they have definitely identified those and have plans to improve them this summer. And hopefully next week at BlackBerry World, we'll find out a lot more about their kind of more exact plans on addressing some of the complaints about the playbook. But if people kind of accept the playbook as generally okay, and I think that the reaction to the playbook has been less negative than the overall reaction to RIM in general.
Yep.
And so, as much as that sounds like a backhanded slap in the face, and that it's good because it's not as bad as before, I think you can draw a really good positive of the fact that when the playbook first reviews came out, they were tepid, but they weren't all like, this sucks. They were just like, not overly positive, but not overly negative. And since it's come out, you don't hear a lot of stories now saying, now that the playbook's on the market, everybody hates it. You just don't hear those stories. And I think that it's a positive sign for RIM moving forward that, they took a year and they actually produced the playbook really quickly. People say it took them a while, but the reality is they did it really quickly and got it out on market. And the positive feelings from this playbook have a chance to spill over into their next product releases if they can follow up the playbook launch with other releases that at least are in the same ballpark, and that maybe they don't blow people away, but they don't disappoint people either.
Yeah, but so they've come out with that. You're right, and but some of the things that they do is always it's always just shocking to me, and we'll come to that in a second. But they came out with the lower end of the range for this coming quarter of 13.5 to 14.5 million devices that they're going to sell. And one of the things that was always an interesting piece was that they realized that there was a higher than expected mix of devices shipped towards the lower end of the handsets, like the cheap phones, right? And it's one of those things that when an enterprise company goes into the consumer market, they're always shocked that nobody's going to spend $500 on a BlackBerry Bold, like I did when I ran Rove. I went out and bought that device at $500, but the average consumer's not going to spend that. They're going to spend like the $49 deal. And I just saw that Best Buy and Future Shop are giving away Blackberries this weekend. So it's the cheap of the cheap, and the volume has to materialize. And if they haven't updated anything over a period of time, any good devices, and you look over and you see an HTC device or a Motorola device or any other device or an iPhone, hard to compete with that. So their challenges are many, but still 14.5 or say 13.5 to 14.5 million devices, it's still okay.
Yeah. What I'd be really interested to know is internally at RIM, what the reality of their decisions on stock price implications were last year. Because RIM and Nokia made the same decision. They were both in the same spot. They said, you know what? We have a platform that is not going to work for us for the future. And we have to reinvent our platform. And both companies had to know that the sacrifice for doing that was going to be, at least in the short term, a significant decrease in the growth rate, at least, or the number of devices they shipped.
Yep.
For RIM, it would be growth rate because they were still growing. For Nokia, it would be a decrease in the number of devices they were shipping.
Yep.
But both made that same decision. In order to compete with Apple, we are going to have to reinvent our platform. And so I'd be interested to know what internally they projected the impact on the stock price to be when they said, okay, we are going to have to revise projections. We are actually not going to meet these, or we're going to be lower than you're expected. They'd have to know that would hurt their stock price. Be really interested to know if the impact they're feeling in their stock right now is in line with what they would have projected.
Well, I think that when you start to think about this, the impact that they're talking about, the only difference is that what Nokia did was wholesale change, right? So they made that decision to go with a partner like Microsoft. What RIM did, obviously, was buy QNX and integrate that operating system into the playbook, and then talk about integrating it into the new devices. And then they went and said that instead of releasing OS 6.1 coming up, we're going to just call it 7 and release it there. But the question I have is that, why don't you continuously take this hit? Just take the hit, get the QNX operating system on the devices, move forward. Don't do this interim step, because you're limiting what who's going to buy an OS 7 device versus waiting a couple of months or a number of months for the QNX device or the QNX OS device. And this is what we saw Microsoft do. Microsoft went into basically a cocoon for 2 years to come out with Windows Phone 7. They abandoned 6.5. They abandoned Windows Mobile and said, look, we're going to take this hit now because we know that in 2 years from now, the market is going to be exploding, and we want to make sure that we have the chassis to be able to build on that. So, but what they've done has had a massive impact already, because if you listen to IDC, I guess recently released a list of the top hardware vendors in the mobile space and smartphone, and Apple obviously shot up. I think they're number 3 now. They jumped up to 18 or 19% of the global market, North American market, and RIM plummeted. They dropped 5 or 6% down to 14%. And this is a pretty significant drop for RIM because most of their revenue is driven off of hardware sales. So you can see how this is going to have an impact, obviously, because that's exactly where they hope to generate all their revenue. Do you think that this is going to have an impact on this is just going to continue that slide? So bad news is always going to be highlighted with RIM going forward, wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because you can make an analogy from Microsoft, except that it's not really valid, because mobile for Microsoft is a slice of the pie, and not a big slice of the pie. So they can afford to tank that slice of the pie and not feel a big effect within their company, go in the tank for 2 years and come out with something brand new. Yep. Nokia can't do that. RIM can't do that, because that's tanking the entire company for 2 years and coming back out.
Yep.
So they have to take a leveraged approach, and whether it's BlackBerry 7 or 6.1, it's a marketing term for an OS upgrade, right? And there is a lot of people that love their BlackBerries and don't want to wait 2 years for a new BlackBerry device. So I think it's a good situation to come out with some new devices that appease the BlackBerry core base, to make sure that you maintain your core BlackBerry base over the next year while you do a transition in the same time period that Nokia is doing it. They're both saying that 2012 will be the year when most of their devices are shipping with the new operating system. Yep. Nokia hasn't abandoned Symbian. They're still shipping Symbian devices this year. The transition plan is like a mirror between the two. The difference is Nokia didn't buy Microsoft like RIM bought QNX for obvious reasons. They just partnered with them. But
we've always said,
as you say, the North American market share for RIM is going down based on where the skew of their device sales are coming from, which is, as you go down to the low end, the North American market is a little less price sensitive as well. So when you get into markets like Latin America, when you get into markets like Southeastern Asia, and those markets, Europe, are a little more price sensitive in terms of the low end up to where the devices are. They don't want to spend money with the exception of Europe, the dollar isn't quite as valued high. So you can't take a $500 phone and sell it there. You have to give them away for free, or you have to sell them for really cheap prices. And RIM is selling a ton of devices there. It's their low-end devices, but they're selling a bunch of them, and it's just kind of moving their margins down because their high-end margin devices aren't moving as much as their low-end margin devices.
No, but that's the shocker that always happens, right? An enterprise will spend an average cost of $250 to $350 per device, and the average human in a developed nation will spend, I think the threshold is $199 per device at the top end. 149 or even 99 is the probably the expected rate. But in the developing nations, you're competing with like $25 or equivalents of. So, on another side is that they've been very aggressive with the acquisitions, and I think that this is great. So I think they've gotten over the whole, got to build it inside, got to make it inside, got to bake it, got to nurture it. They said, screw that. So they bought Gist, they bought TAT, they bought QNX, and they just picked up Tungle.me, which is a Montreal-based Uber calendaring system. It's a company that is run by Marc Gingras, and it's a neat little tool. Is there a strategy here, do you think, with all of these acquisitions? So TAT and QNX, understood, right? Future of the operating system right there. But with Tungle and Gist, are these guys... what do you think the strategy is behind this?
Well, it's interesting because RIM has had the least amount of not built here, it's kind of just mentality for a long time, and that they've acquired that RSS company, with Virgo or Vigo.
Vigo, yep.
And they acquired the Torch mobile browser as well to upgrade their browser to
and Chalk. Remember they bought Chalk as well for an insane amount of money.
Exactly, they bought Chalk. So they do go out and spend their money on buying companies instead of just trying to rebuild what's already out there, which is actually, I think, quite a good thing for them. Yep. Rather than trying to rebuild something, they'll buy it and integrate it. And they did it pretty quickly. The browser integrated relatively quickly, at least technology from it did. The Virgo or
Vigo.
Vigo, sorry. Operating platform got integrated as RSS feeds into the BlackBerry pretty quickly. And so I think they're doing a good job of this integration and deciding that, we're going to pick and choose where we want to be. And where they know their strength is right now is in social. They know that BlackBerries are extremely social devices. People are using them a lot to interact with social networks, to message, to text. And so buying TAT and QNX were to deal with the next platform and improving the UI on it. Buying Gist and Tungle.me were about buying into the social sharing agenda. And so Tungle.me is great, except that the problem with all those services is that if somebody else isn't using it, it doesn't add value to it. It's only useful if everybody's using it. Yeah,
so Tungle's good. Tungle's good. Just simply as a way to, you don't have to be using it. I like the service a lot. It's a... I can throw up a bunch of meeting times and you can choose the best that's appropriate to you, right, at the lowest level. And I think that that's really impactful. And I think that when they brought the Tungle app for BlackBerry is awesome because it does availability. So it really is it's a smarter calendaring system. And I think that that's probably the best thing. And Gist is a smarter socialized inbox, right? So it plays well to what you're talking about.
Exactly. And if you take Tungle.me and you integrate that technology right in along with the BlackBerry platform as it is, especially with the Biz.
And the Bez. Yeah, Biz and Bez.
Bez, you already kind of have that calendaring opportunity within your own enterprise. And so this helps extend it out further outside of your enterprise.
Yeah.
And then, we don't really talk about, we haven't on this podcast very much, talked about cloud services too much. There's tons of rumors about what Apple is doing with it, and Google wants to do something with it. If you look at Tungle.me as implemented as a biz consumer cloud service, I think there's really a sign there that RIM is looking forward to what consumers are going to want of the enterprise services they're offering and how they can offer them in a friendly manner. And Tungle.me is a great consumer-friendly service that if RIM launched cloud services via the Biz and had Tungle.me built in, there's quite a leg up on their competition.
I like it. I like that concept. I know that I'm a Tungle.me user just because I really want to support Mark and everything that he's doing, and I'll continue to do that as long as RIM doesn't strip out all functionality and make it a Biz-only application. But I like to see this. And they should be rewarded. I think that RIM should be rewarded for the effort that they're going through here and the acquisitions. On the flip side, I'd say, this dovetails into our last piece on the RIM story, is that they've launched a developer challenge. It's a $3 million fund for a developer challenge. It's always around BlackBerry World that they announce this. It's with the BlackBerry Fund, which you would recall 3 years ago, they put $150 million into a BlackBerry Fund. and it's funded some great companies like Zobni and a bunch of other ones. But it just seems to me like it's a trolling. So, Gist was an ISV. Tungle is an ISV. All of these guys that they seem to be acquiring, they pick and select the best ISVs and bring them into the company. Is that good for the ecosystem, for RIM's ecosystem? Man, I wish they had bought Rove, but
Well, yeah. I mean, you can make two arguments with it, right? You could say, well, all you're doing is you're pulling good BlackBerry developers out of the market that could be working in other stuff. But on the other hand, like, does Apple ever buy a company that makes Apple stuff? No, they just build it and put you out of business. So there's a little bit of a safety net in that you can build something for RIM and know that if it's best of breed and it really enhances the platform, there's a good chance RIM is going to knock on your door with a good acquisition offer. So it's almost like, yeah, you're pulling them out of the ecosystem, but you're giving incentive for somebody else to come in and take their place and develop the next bright new thing, and rewarding innovation on your platform by bringing it and making it a core piece of your platform. So if you ever have a piece of the BlackBerry, you're like, this is really annoying me, and I bet you it's annoying everybody else, and I really need to fix it. If you do, and it is annoying everybody, RIM's probably going to buy it.
Yeah, right away. So it behooves them anyways to fund those companies that they see some value in.
Absolutely.
So this is
I don't know why Apple, Google, this is the BlackBerry Partners Fund that RIM started up. I think it was DevCon 09 was maybe the first time that they launched it. It's brilliant. It's like, you know what? It's an arm's length investment firm in mobile technology, for which it's not all BlackBerry stuff.
Nope.
Google bought Social Gold, which was an investment of the BlackBerry Partners Fund.
Yep.
But what it does is it says, you know what, we are trying to stimulate. We're going to give money, even small amounts of money, to companies that are going to be building innovative stuff in mobile. And through the Partners Fund, put a little bit of pressure on to say, don't forget about BlackBerry here while you're building things, and try and get some of that, mind share, market share, get some of those people to build things for BlackBerry, and have instead of just kind of putting your finger in the air and going, I'm trying to figure out where the wind is blowing, having some feelers in with the companies that are actually blowing the wind. I think that's valuable for them.
I do as well. So our second story that we wanted to cover today is about freemium apps. And we talked about this quite a bit over the last number of episodes. But a couple of stories came out that were really interesting. First of all was the sheer number of freemium apps that are now coming out on the Android platform. For the first time, I think that there are more free applications on Android for the Android OS than there are for the iOS, and it's a horse race. It's the numbers that they've got here. They're talking about 134,000 free apps for Android versus 121,000 for the iOS, and so this is as certainly the iOS diminishes in terms of the largest store, and Android becomes the largest marketplace of applications. You expect this to happen, but what was really interesting was that the fact that when you look at who's generating what kind of revenue, do you really want the applications to be free? Do you want to be known as the free marketplace as opposed to the paid marketplace? And then how does freemium play into this? So it's no shocker that there's going to be more free applications on Android than there are on the iOS. But are people now expecting not to pay for applications on Android?
I definitely think it's a concern to train your customers about what to expect when they're visiting the store.
Yeah.
And
so what do you mean by that, though? Like, condition them to pay kind of thing, or condition them to be free?
Yeah, I think almost more the opposite is worse. Like, conditioning them to think everything's free is worse than conditioning people to think that they're going to need to pay for things.
Yeah. Even
in nominal amounts. But, ultimately, Google has done a poor job of prioritizing Android market within the Android ecosystem, right? Like they're not a retailer, they're not experts at it. They haven't said this is our number one priority is to sell content to your device, which is basically been Apple's number one priority for the last year, right?
Yep.
Is building phones that they can sell content to, and along with iTunes as a desktop application that people already expected to pay for stuff through. So I think it's a concern for Google that for this first wave of phones, and Of course, I'm saying first wave. It's been 2 years, and they've got 35% of the market, but it's still early, and we're always gonna say it's early in the mobile market because it moves so fast. But having a store that's not a great store, and having Amazon jump into the fray now, who's an expert retailer, and Amazon's going to be competing with the perception of free on Android and trying to provide a great experience for it. But it's a problem for developers in the sense that it makes it more difficult to make money on Android. But ultimately, if what it does is get Android higher market share, and so the per user, the ARPU, average revenue per user, may be lower, but if you have more users on it, maybe ultimately the ecosystem can still generate the revenue on it, and different business models will just need to be adapted to take advantage of the mentality of the customers on the site. I mean, 124, however many Apple's free applications are, 121,000 or something, over 134,000. I mean, the difference isn't the fact there's a few extra free applications. The difference is that half the free apps on Apple are easy to spend money on, and they're designed for that purpose. And the purchasing system within them for in-app purchases of virtual goods or whatever you're buying is easy to use. It's something people feel comfortable and secure with. And that's just something that Google hasn't addressed on their platform. But once they address that makes it easy for people to spend money and makes people feel confident that they can spend money and not worry that it's going to be their credit card is going to be hacked or cracked or their account's going to get compromised. Like, security is ultimately, I feel funny going back to that, but security on Android is a concern for people, not because people are thinking Android is insecure, but because they don't have the perception of security on it. And because you haven't heard of any problems on iTunes security-wise, it kind of implicitly has security as a benefit. So Android, maybe that's a problem for them, is that there's no implicit security, and anyone you talk to that develops on Android will tell you that it's not a secure platform right now.
Yeah, but what's shocking though, we come back to those numbers, is that Android only has 206 or just over 200,000. Nice brand placement, I love it. Android only has around just over 200,000 applications, and 134 or 135,000 of those are free. So a good majority of these are free applications. So it is setting an expectation. Just finishing out these, this is the Distimo numbers, or Distimo numbers that came out. Coming back to our RIM story, is that they're talking about RIM's increase over the last quarter is 21% increase. It's the highest number of increase in terms of apps. And they have a considerable number of free as well as a percentage. But I think that when you look at how this is going to shake up, these free is not necessarily bad, and we've talked about this before, just about the freemium apps. All of a sudden, everything's a freemium app. When you did in-app purchasing, when Apple did it first, and then RIM did it, integrated in-app purchasing. Now Android's done it. Now all of a sudden, all of these free apps have just kind of escalated everywhere. And I play Gun Brothers, right? I play Gun Brothers. I have a crappy gun, because I haven't gone and done what everybody else has done, which is basically incentivized downloads or cost per install campaigns, which is exactly what Apple's just now cracked down on. So what ends up happening, for those of you who don't know what this is, it is a game that's free, but you can unlock new levels, or you can speed things up either by purchasing through a virtual currency or virtual goods system, dollars to be able to buy upgrades, like in Gun Brothers, for example, or you can go and a little advertisement will pop up and say, listen, we're going to give you $13 if you click here and install this game, and then it basically incentivizes you to go install a new game. So you click here, you go to the iTunes, you download it, you install that game, and then when you relaunch the game that you're in this instance, Gun Brothers, it adds $13. And you can do this so that you can ramp up and go and buy all the best equipment, which I think, Bacon, you've done very effectively.
One big ass gun, anyways.
Yeah, one gun. But this is so the way that it works is that the game that you're playing gets obviously is leveraged to install other games, and there's an intermediary that pays. It's basically like an advertising channel ultimately. And you're happy because you get plays, you get people that are addicted to the game. That other game is happy because they actually receive some, a bump in their downloads, and they leverage the popularity of each other's games. And so Apple's now cutting down on this. And the big fear now is that all of a sudden these freemium games are going to disappear, or they're going to be fewer and fewer because they've stopped allowing these to come in. But this is, as long as there is an opportunity, people are going to find unique ways to generate interest, generate awareness, and try to, not, this isn't gaming, this is an innovative way to draw attention to games, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because is it gaming the sales charts, or is it modifying? Was the goal to increase your rankings, or was it to generate downloads through an alternate source? Like when Tapjoy is out there, and that's the most prominent example on iTunes, on Apple. When Tapjoy is out there and they're cross-promoting apps, are they generating the extra downloads because of the cross-promotion in Tapjoy, or because the cross-promotion in Tapjoy brings it up the sales rankings, the download rankings? I'm sure it's a combination of the two. But it's really interesting to note that if you get an extra 10,000 downloads because of your cross-promotion through Tapjoy, as direct downloads through Tapjoy, people would say, sure, great, that's just as valuable to me as being moving up the charts a few slots. So I don't have a problem with the rankings charts being modified as long as I continue to do cross-promotion. And that Tapjoy is really doing cross-promotion. The difference is that they're providing incentive for the user to just download the app, run it once, and delete it, because they get some free stuff for it, which is what I did for like 10 applications to get the extra currency in Gun Brothers.
Yeah.
But you know what? 2 of those applications I downloaded, I did use more than once. And that's the key. That's something that people forget, is that just because 95% of the applications that I download and run only once to get the currency, doesn't mean there's 5 or 10% of those that I might go, you know what? It is kind of interesting. Maybe I won't delete it right away. Maybe I'll try it later.
Yeah.
And it just becomes a conversion rate thing. That the difference between somebody downloading the game off of iTunes, which is going to have a fairly high conversion rate of running once, and as we know, there's 26% of apps that are only run once, which means 74% are run more than one time, versus an app download off of Tapjoy, which might have different ratios. It might have more like 74% are opened only once, and 26% are opened more than once.
Yeah.
So just because those ratios are reversed doesn't mean they have no value for those downloads. And I think a lot of developers really value the fact that they get some extra exposure and extra downloads through there. And it's going to make an impact for people right now to find some other way of generating those downloads.
Well, I mean, I like it simply because this is how some people just rely on finding new games. I mean, the simple fact is that when there are 500,000 applications for these devices, plus BlackBerry, plus the iPad apps at 75,000 apps, discoverability is very difficult. So you have to come up with a way to do it. And a classic publisher will take all their games and put it into other games tab. It's the same thing, right? But when you only have one game and you want to leverage somebody else's game, why wouldn't you be able to, or one app, and why? This makes a lot of sense to me, and it's a premium feature that you would pay for. But I know that Apple has now stopped this. They've actually started to reject the cost per install campaigns in a lot of the apps. And but I think that Android and BlackBerry are ripe right now because they seem to be always a little bit behind when it comes to these things. So again, big opportunities are in the Android market right now to do a cost per install campaign on these games, as well as the BlackBerry market, a cost per install in these campaign in these marketplaces. Who knows what the effect is going to be?
It's interesting to look at it and say, well, what they're cracking down on is cost per install campaigns. But you know what? Advertising is kind of cost per install.
Yeah.
Like the developer doesn't make the direct revenue by giving away in-game currency, or the user isn't incentivized by giving in-game currency away from it, but the developer is still making revenue off of somebody clicking on that ad to download another game. So the difference that Apple is trying to put in, like the line they're trying to put in, is that developers can make direct revenue off of it, but users can't be incentivized to take basically something they would normally pay for and get it for free, where the developer still gets some money for it and Apple gets cut out of the value chain. And ultimately, that's the key point. Apple was cut out of the value chain. And it's something we've talked about on this podcast before, which is Apple does a great job of keeping as many loopholes open as possible until they're ready to close a loophole.
Yeah.
And when they decide to close a loophole, it's because they're not getting the value out of that loophole. They wait for people to find where the value is, then they say, okay, that's great, we're going to take that value back. I don't have a commercial problem with that. I support companies being capitalistic and taking the money they can take out of it. But it does become a differentiator for companies like Google and companies like RIM and Microsoft as well to look at where Apple is pulling the value out and deciding if that value is something they're willing to give up in exchange for the benefits that provides the ecosystem and the developer.
Sure, and you know what? This is honestly, this is exactly that. The opportunity, and that's what I say when Apple's a little bit ahead of everybody else. Is that whatever they're closing off, if you want to start to escalate your app stores, start adopting that, or don't crack down on it right away. At some point, you might have to because it does somewhat skew the downloads and the rankings. They said that 94 of the top 150 free iPhone games in March were actually freemium titles, and as a lot of those were directly resulted in the cost per install campaign. So it's going to have an impact, but this is opportunity.
But it only has an impact if you're generating your top download charts in the most basic manner, which is simply the number of downloads, right? If you add a few other metrics in place to weight how the downloads are generated, then you can change that totally. You know exactly how many people clicked on the link on the top downloads to download versus downloaded from another source. It's just simple refer. You know how many people are using the applications. You can build analytics in there. So when you put all the information together and make your download charts smarter, instead of just your basic sort by field number of downloads, then you can accommodate those services in place and have them not skew the download rankings as much. Now, I think they should skew the download rankings a little bit. I think that those downloads should have an impact because they are legitimate downloads of your application. They should have an impact. Should they have an equal impact to somebody that is browsing the store, seeing it there and downloading it? Probably not. But should they have 25% of the impact? Fine. So you weight it with 0.25 as a weight on your ranking system. Well, and those are opportunities.
I think maybe what are we to maybe 10 days or so. All these reports started coming out about how Apple was adjusting how their apps are ranked, and it went from the popularity of the app. It went from just strict download numbers. They're speculating here. They don't know yet. They've abandoned just download numbers, and they say that it's now possible that they're factoring in ratings and daily use into the rankings. So it's engagement. Right, and I think that that's something that I think everybody will welcome, obviously, because if your app, like the Facebook app, automatically shot up to #1 in the top free apps because what? Everybody downloaded it, everybody uses it every day, right? So, and then you start to wonder why they haven't built a Facebook app for the iPad yet, which is a completely different story. But this might actually show true engagement. So if you guys, for example, are a shop that are looking for trends in other store application development, this would be very beneficial. So you could look at what's going on in iTunes now, truly engaged users, and bring that over to, say, I don't know, App World, or I don't know, the Android Marketplace, or Amazon's Marketplace, or whoever else is going to build one. So it's an interesting thing because the incentivized downloads has been driving a lot of activity, and we're going to see the impact of that over the next little while as Apple starts to figure out how to actually really rank the apps that are in their store now, because it's a problem now. So the last story that I wanted to touch on really was this report that came out by ABI Research, that there's going to be an estimated 44 billion mobile applications that will be downloaded within the next 5 years. 44 billion, and what they're talking about, an average population by that time of 7 billion people. So it's kind of 5 or 6 applications per person on the planet. And that's not really shocking because, if I look at my devices, I'm talking about really a ton, I would say, of apps. I probably have downloaded, at least 1,000 apps myself. Right? Maybe I'm probably a light app user for a guy who's in this business. But most of them are like Phineas and Ferb games for my kids. But when you start to talk about the impact of this, is that now we're looking at a shift in the way that we actually use software. I find that I'm spending much more time on my iPad than I am on my laptop now. And that's a clear indication because of the singularity of an application. It means that I can go in and get things done. And in fact, I'll put a plug in here. This great little app for everybody who has a Twitter app, Tweetbot for the iPhone is better than any Twitter application on the desktop or on the iPad. In fact, I pull myself away from that. So when you start to see this, the singularity of the app, making it very effective, ease of use, what does that do for productivity, and what does that do for the way that how does it change computing? And this is really the big question. I have singular apps for singular tasks on my devices, and now I've started to do that with the App Store on my Mac, and I like it. I like it like this. I don't want apps that do 1,000 different things. Well, do you see this happening with the way that you use apps as well, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the analogy I would make is basically to websites, which is that when the web started taking off and you had websites exploding everywhere, you got numbers like how many websites people were visiting, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, people are visiting like thousands and thousands of websites all over the place," and it's crazy. And you had websites popping up for everything, and everyone would make one website to do the one thing that they wanted a website to do. And then websites kind of got more complicated as programming got more complicated on them, and they started becoming multidisciplinary sites with doing lots of things. But in the end, there's millions and millions of websites out there, and people visit thousands of them every week that they go to. So I look at apps in a similar vein in that apps kind of exploded in usage as access to apps has exploded in usage.
Yep.
And with more people becomes more of the small segments of single use cases people need that actually become viable as actual apps. When you have 1 million people doing stuff and you have 1,000 different things they want to do, that's not many people per thing. But when you have 100 million people doing stuff, suddenly you have a market for that one little thing that before only had 1,000 people interested in it. So I think that the explosion of the availability of apps has really increased the niche market for small apps and the acceptance from people that, they have a device, there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of apps out there. Why should they take one app that's complicated to use that does a bunch of stuff together when they could just put 3 icons beside each other that does the 3 individual things they want to do? Yeah. I think that's the big change for people. It's like, I have a music player. I wanted to play music. I don't really care that it can play video. The iPod player on the iPhone that has video and podcast and music together is actually crazy complicated. I'd rather have just a podcast dedicated app on there, so I didn't have to click like 5 different icons to get between podcasts and songs and videos. Yep. And that's like the most popular application that launched this whole mobile device category for Apple, and it seems like a complicated application for the iPhone now.
Well, it does too many things.
Exactly, because it does so many things. I think that in the future we may see things kind of coalesce back again into less individualized applications as devices get more powerful and get more information being able to show on the screen at the same time as well. So you'll always have small screens that are better for single applications, but I definitely think that as device screens are getting a little bit bigger and as people are getting to understand how to use mobile devices more and the UI constructs that people are getting used to are becoming second nature. So what 3 dots in the bottom right-hand corner means on an iPhone. It means click here to see more activities. Yeah. So as that becomes more ingrained in what people automatically expect to do, some of those things that get buried, people will use more because they'll actually go and try and figure them out. So I think it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years those types of UI paradigms that are being developed on RIM and on Android and on iOS become more familiar to people if people are able to make applications that are a little more complicated and maybe do more than one thing but are still popular for people to use. Yeah,
but basically it's a UI challenge. You hide the things that you don't need to show until somebody actually wants to use it.
Yeah, you know what? Microsoft learned this like 4 years ago with the ribbon in Office. Yeah. And everybody, when the ribbon came out in Office, a lot of people were like, "Oh my God, what the heck? Like, what is this ribbon thing here? I'm used to like menus with 1,700 options on them all." And very, very smartly, Microsoft said, "We know it's an 80-20 rule. You're only using 20% of it, and if you need the other ones, you're going to take the time to figure out where they are." Yeah. And it's been awesome. Like the ribbon interface has made productivity on Office applications for me in particular skyrocket because now I don't have to remember which sub-menu the action was because if I'm using it regularly, it's on the ribbon and it's right there in front of me. So I really think that's an example of where applications on desktop got really complicated, feature bloat in Office. They didn't remove features. They just changed the way they displayed those features to users to make them more accessible.
And that you start to see that with mobile as you get accepting of a simple application and you start adding new features to that application. This is a UI thing. Well, I highly recommend anybody. Tweetbot is $1.99, but when you start using it, man, it's just like this is the perfect device. And there's no affiliate network or fee or anything that I get. I have a deep appreciation for good UI. And you'll start using that over your desktop. I mean, I find that the desktop Tweety, even the Twitter client for Mac OS, is terrible compared to it. And that's a good program.
By the way, Tweetbot requires OS 4.1 on your phone.
Oh, well, that's okay though.
Those of us that still are using an arcane OS.
Well, that's it. This is a story that we're going to follow because I've shifted the way that I work. Very clearly, I do quite a bit more, as I said, on my iPad. I'm leveraging that thing way more than I ever have, and not just for consumption, but for creation. And even on my desktop, I've gone away from from mail clients. I don't use Gmail, but I've moved into Sparrow as my email client, and away from a mixed calendaring and email application. They don't go together. They never should go together. So, that kind of simplicity. I know you're shaking your head. I know. We'll talk about that in another episode. But this is a shift. I think that in a number of years, what we're going to see is the impact of this app economy, maybe from a financial side, but as well as from of the way that we work side. And it's all going to start on the mobile. Bacon, you are heading down to sunny Orlando on the weekend to go to BlackBerry World.
That's where I'll be.
Formerly known as WES. Anything that you anticipate that you're going to see there?
I'm hoping that they clarify some of the kind of rough timelines they have for Playbook stuff, like the Android player and the BlackBerry OS player that's going to go on it, the mail client, things like that. I hope they clarify some of the information, which I'm told they will. I hope they talk about some new BlackBerry devices. I expect them to be announcing some of the new ones there at the show.
Good.
Either publicly or privately. I think those are the main things that I'm interested from a just general RIM perspective. I think I'll talk to people there on the App World team and see what their plans are on that side to add functionality and features, maybe to take advantage of some of the holes in other systems, like as we've just talked about with Apple and their incentivized downloads. RIM has their application ads interface, which is a good first step. But if they could get virtual currency going, that they could really take advantage of incentivized downloads and provide that as a feature update for developers. But other than that, just kind of take the lay of the land. I didn't make it down there to the show last year, so there's a number of people I haven't seen for a couple of years. I'm looking forward to catching up with. But go and wave the flag and see the shows. Go and see if I can heckle some of my RIM friends that are speaking and ask them questions that they don't know the answers to. It's fun. But
yeah, they're like, oh no, it's Bacon again. I'm going to get a question that I can't answer.
I've never had my hand up so long while someone's walking around with a mic when they know me.
Anybody but that guy. Well,
wait, anybody else? Does anybody have a question?
Anybody.
Fine, Jeff.
Anybody.
Here, ask your question.
So what I'm hoping to do this week with you is to connect, and we'll see midway through and see what the lay of the land is down there, and see what's happening. Some of the announcements that they've actually made public, and see the impact down there. I also like to know what the attendance rate is like for this, because I know that it's a well attended, a well run event. It's a lot of fun. So
great food.
It's great food. That's all I heard when I took over Rove. It's like it's great food, and the entertainment is excellent, and I was like, well, what about the conference? Nobody goes to the conference, man. It's like, gee. So, well, have a safe trip. Enjoy down there, and we'll touch base during the week. Jeff, thanks for doing this, and this has been episode number 14 of the Week in Mobile. Stay tuned for some tweaks that we'll be making to this thing as we go forward to make this a little bit more interesting to everyone who is watching and listening. But for those who have made it through this episode, thank you so much. Thank you. And feedback, bring it, untether@gmail.com, or even do it at Jeff's blog if you found that, at bacononthego.com. That's where you find him. You can find me at untether.tv. My name is Rob Woodbridge. That's Jeff Bacon. Thank you guys for watching.
You can't read it.